Let's start by taking a look at Death Knell for the Lecture, starting on page 593. Now, this essay argues that the technologies of online education can radically improve our failing education system. It's important to note, though, that this essay is a popular piece of writing, not an academic one. You might remember from chapter 1 how short paragraphs can indicate that an essay has been published in a popular magazine or newspaper. So as we use this for an example, remember that for an academic essay, you're likely to combine 2 or more of those short paragraphs into a larger essay paragraph for your paper. Notice that the first 2 paragraphs discuss the problem that this essay will address. The education system is in a state of crisis, and money alone shouldn't fix it. That's only part of the solution. Although the author doesn't specifically name her opponents, she is addressing a counterargument here all the same. The counterargument basically is, all the ed system needs is more money. She gives some concessions to that viewpoint, but she adds that it's not enough. We also need to reduce the costs. Another place where she subtly addresses a counterargument is in paragraph 15, where she's been discussing the benefits of computerized homework and grading. She acts as though the opposing view is something she came up with herself. It's as though she's taking the reader through her own thought processes. Oh, here's a problem. I wonder how we can solve it. If you look at paragraphs 16 and 17, you see how she answers this question. She shows how technology provides more, not less, interaction with the professor. Here in paragraph 18, she uses a more straightforward approach by saying, some argue. So she's specifically pointing to her opponents here. That allows her to address the counterargument more directly, saying, although people argue this, here's my solution to that response. Going back to the beginning of the essay, let's take a look at the strategies of paragraphs 3 and 4. Here we have a blend of 3 different approaches. We have example, as they're discussing the American agricultural economy. And we have cause and effect, basically saying that the change that we saw in agriculture, going from where 60% of the workforce was in agriculture to only 2%, that change was created by technology. That was the cause, this was the effect. And thirdly, we have comparison. The author is drawing a connection between the agricultural economy and the educational economy that we have right now. Technology as the cause here to the effect that we saw throughout history. You might notice that she doesn't really give a lot of evidence for that, and that's partly because this is a popular essay, like we've talked about, not an academic essay, but it's also because that is a cause that's fairly well assumed among historians. So the author can sort of take it as a given that we believe that, and then she can move on to her comparison, which is the real question at issue. It might be interesting to think about with these paragraphs whether we accept her connection, her comparison between agriculture and education. Those 2 things are very different, but she's trying to draw, and apply the same principles to both. That if technology helped agriculture, therefore technology will help the educational system. Do we buy that? Is agriculture the same? Does it have enough similarities with education that we can believe that if technology works with one, it works with the other? What are some possible criticisms of this comparison? Those would be good things to ask about this essay if we're trying to think about it more critically. You might yourself want to go back through the essay, think carefully about the strategy of each paragraph, pick it apart like we've done here, and see what you can learn. Moving on to a discussion of the selfish blues on page 611. One thing I'd like you to notice about this essay is that it's partly a comparison essay, but it compares unlike things, just like we've discussed. Smoking and cell phones. If you put those 2 forward as a topic without any context, a reader would just be like, what do those 2 things possibly have in common? So that makes this essay interesting. It's comparing things that we wouldn't expect to be compared. Now, also notice that the comparison isn't a side-by-side back and forth comparison like we've been used to seeing in Chapter 11, where the writer goes, item A has this quality, item B has this quality, item A has this quality, item B has this quality, back and forth in one paragraph. Instead, the author in this essay gives 2 entire paragraphs about smoking and then moves on to entire paragraphs about cell phones. And so we learn all the qualities of one side before we learn all the qualities of the other side. And then the author uses stylistic repetition to draw our attention to some of the connections. Like, for example, the way that she repeats the line, sometimes you couldn't hold my hand because. And then when we hear that line the second time, we go, oh, that was the connection from before. Now, this essay doesn't have a traditional introduction and conclusion, again, because it's a popular essay in a popular magazine. Sometimes they don't do that quite as distinctly as we do in academia. But it is interesting to notice that the last couple of sentences look to the future, just like we talked about that a conclusion should do. What will researchers discover next? Is one of the questions that she poses. And also, what might happen if cell phones are outlawed? Both of those get the reader's mind thinking about what's to come while also kind of hammering home her main point overall. Another thing to think about with this essay, the author makes a lot of unsupported claims about cell phones causing various emotional problems. Again, this is a popular article. It's not an academic one. In an academic article, if the author made claims like that, they would have to substantiate them with some hard evidence, which this article really isn't interested in doing. It's more an article to get us thinking rather than to, legitimately prove a specific point about cell phones. She's wanting to raise the topic, engender conversation. So take a look back over this article after the video is over and ask yourself, what kinds of evidence would the author have to provide for each of the causal claims that she makes in this article about cell phones? Every time she says, cell phones cause this to happen, cell phones make us do this, cell phones lead to this, how would you support that if you were making that claim in an academic paper?